What's going on, guys, and welcome back to the RAD Lab, a podcast founded on delving deeper into topics to help you become a better athlete, and a platform for athletes, coaches, and clinicians from the community to share their stories and experiences to give you an idea of how to become the best version of yourself. My name is Liam. I'm a strength and conditioning coach here at RAD, and I'm delighted to have you guys along for the ride again as we share this journey towards further understanding the world of human performance. Now, this is the second episode in the lab, and today is all about speed. And what better guest to have to talk about this topic than the speed demon himself, Mr. Linc Barnes. How are you?
Really well, mate. Good to be here.
Fantastic. For those of you who don't know Linc, I'll leave it up to you. Linc, would you like to give yourself a little introduction here and maybe your role at RAD?
Absolutely. So I'm the senior strength and conditioning coach here at the RAD Centre. Behind my education, I have a Masters of Strength and Conditioning, and I'm actually a teacher by trade who got a double degree in Bachelor of Education, Physical Health Ed, as well as a grad dip in Outdoor and Environmental Studies. So whilst I am a coach, I am a teacher by trade.
Yeah, fantastic. And you've had a bit of experience yourself in the realm of speed, I've heard. You've been a track athlete, mostly gift running, correct?
Correct.
Yep. Give us a little bit of history about yourself. So if we're talking about speed today, we need someone who knows what they're talking about. Where did it all start for you? Give us your journey so far.
Yeah, so I suppose it all started with me back in primary school. Obviously loved athletics through primary school. I ran and I generally made the state level of all those races. Through high school it was exactly the same. I was really lucky to go to Ballarat High School, where I had a fantastic track coach in Lindsay Burgoyne, who actually specialises in javelin and hurdles. So he got me into training for that. Tried to turn me into a hurdler. However, I didn't grow past year 8, so I'm quite a short hurdler. So I did stick with just speed work. And then in the later years, we actually, myself and 3 good friends, went on to win 3 state gold medals in the team relays. In the 4x100, we would have won 4, except for a bit of a baton changeover error on the last leg when we're about 30 metres ahead, almost in record-breaking territory, which was disappointing, Hainsey, as you can imagine.
Absolutely.
That was actually for the hat-trick, so that was year 11. We came back in year 12 and we regained our title. And then after that, I did step away from the track for a little bit. Always just loved speed and trying to get faster, but then I moved more into the gym-based. I played team sports all the way through, so I'm a footballer. I've dabbled in a lot of other different sports as well. And then 4 years ago, I actually got back into track running gifts, and that's where my obsession for speed's really come through. And yeah, now my pathway in the RAD Centre and obviously for future studies is along that speed development for athletes.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. I think to kick things off, I just want to talk about how we define speed. So obviously we have a range of different athletes here at the RAD Centre. We've got some that are on, individuals on the track. They're doing their own thing. We've got plenty in team sport as well. How would you define, I suppose, training differences for these different kinds of athletes?
Yeah, that's it. And I think the biggest thing that we need to understand is that speed for different types of athletes is critical, and the way that we coach those is different. So obviously, as you said, if we have a track athlete who is a 100-metre, 200-metre, 400-metre runner, their speed development is going to be completely different almost to what a field sport or a court sport athlete is, and the same for even our swimmers and our gymnasts and things like that. So it is important that we do understand the speed requirements of the individual in their sport, and then from that point of view, we need to be able to identify that in the gym, and then obviously be able to coach speed and acceleration of speed in the gym on the floor.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's super important as well. Like, obviously, there's plenty of team sport athletes out there where, speed is probably just one component of their sport. They've got plenty of other things to focus on as well, versus as you said, the individual athlete where that is pretty much everything that they do. So obviously there's a really big margin there to work within, but also with those differences, you really need that time to be able to, I suppose, identify that for starters, but then also, really delve in and each individual, as we know, genetics come into it as well. So you've got guys and girls who are, potentially they might consider themselves a little bit slower, or they might have, maybe more type 1 fiber dominant versus those who are more genetically blessed for speed with those type 2 fibers. I suppose one big thing that people often sort of talk about is, especially field sport athletes, is I'm looking to get faster, whether it's in pre-season or for the season itself. What are some of the things that they should be focusing on?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it really is dependent on what your needs are. I think one thing that we need to realise, whatever sport it may be, whether that is a track or whether that's a team-based athlete, is that to get faster, you do need to run fast, or you do need to be fast. So while we want to be able to develop it in the gym, at the same time, you need to still be doing things on the track in training where you are just moving fast. The biggest thing that we find, obviously, with a lot of field and court sport athletes is that whilst they come to us and say, I want to get faster, if they're accumulating a huge amount of volume in junk running or just in training load as well, we need to obviously potentially reduce that, as you have already talked about. Our fiber type does determine how fast we can potentially get and how aerobic we can become. So all of us have a specific amount of type 1, type 2 and hybrid fibers in us. We can transfer those hybrid fibers over to be more type 1 or type 2, and our training style reflects that. If we have a footballer who wants to become faster and they're doing 30 kilometers worth of aerobic running, those type 1 hybrid fibers are going to be more dominant than what the type 2 are. So we need to take that into account, be able to break it down. And that's obviously where we look at our planning, our season planning for our athletes, to make sure that we aren't just trying to always do everything at once. We can actually break it down and potentially microdose it or embed it somewhere within the actual 12 months of training plans.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important thing for a lot of athletes to kind of try and understand as well, is it's while in terms of training and those variables, sometimes it is just an open and shut door. You're either training for speed or not. At the same time, you can still integrate it. You can still have that aerobic base as a field sport athlete and still get faster as well. It's not sort of necessarily one or the other. If someone wants to train for speed, they want to get faster, doesn't necessarily mean, say, for example, a footy player, their 2K time doesn't take a hit as a result. So that if you're smart about it, there are ways to actually, get the best of both worlds, I suppose.
Yeah, there certainly is. Yeah. And that's where obviously what we do here and the conversation that we're having with our athletes in here, we're able to hopefully educate them and show them the pathway to those goals.
Absolutely. So let's talk about some field sport athletes. Obviously, when they want to train for speed, they're doing their best. They're out there. They're trying to get the work done. Something that I often hear about and often see is just in terms of dosing, like what we spoke about before with the volume, even in terms of recovery within the session. So a lot of athletes may go out there and train for a bit of speed, but they might do 10 100-meter sprints with a walk-back recovery, and then once they get back to the start again, off they go again. As we know, it's probably not the most optimal way to do things. How would you probably, say for an athlete in a pre-season block, they've come to you, they said, I want to get faster. However, I'm still training, say, for footy or for soccer, something like that. How would you integrate that sort of training into their pre-season block? So what would you look at in terms of session volume and even in terms of recovery within that session?
Yeah, and that's it. And as we mentioned before, to get fast, you need to run fast. To be able to run fast, it means you need to be fully recovered to reach that top speed. And we like to talk about for development of speed, we do have those acceleration phases and the max speed or max velocity phases. For speed exposure, we can actually only hold our max velocity or max speed for about 20 to 30 meters. And apart from that, we start to actually decelerate. So you've got to take that into account, how you actually space that at, how much actual max speed running you're getting. When we look at such as AFL footballers or Australian rules footballers, generally across the week or in a game, they might be reaching around, between 200 to 600 high speed meters. That means obviously 95% plus of their max speed. What we want to be able to do is be able to target that. So within a training session, it might be on a Tuesday or a Thursday. We do have some speed work in there. That could be a fly. So what a fly is that where we're jogging, we're building up, we're slowly building to that max speed, and then we have a cone to say this is the start of your max speed section, and then 20, 30 meters down, that is the end of our max speed section. So that's a really good way that I like to dose max speed work within my footballers that I work with, and I know, Hainsey, you're the exact same as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, super important to be touching on it. There's a lot of guys that, probably more specifically in season, but even in pre-season, there's a lot of guys who, perhaps, I've done a hammy before or this and that and the other thing. And then they really almost avoid the speed work out of fear that it may, hamper them, or, if they pull up sore, do an injury or something like that it might hamper their overall performance. But as we know, sprinting is probably the hardest thing you can do for your hammies. It's the most, I suppose your hammies will be most activated while sprinting. So I try to look at it almost in terms of, we want enough dose for, to keep them fast, but also from an injury prevention side point as well. You got to look at it, and you're not going to be able to run fast unless you run fast. So obviously it's a bit of a paradox, but if you do it in a way that's smart, you can do it in a way in your programming, you're doing it correctly. It's certainly, it's doable. And there's plenty of people out there, field sport athletes or otherwise, that could, really benefit from a bit of extra speed work.
Yeah, that's it. And you also look at, obviously, and this is probably more for the coaches, that when you implement your max speed within a training week in season, because as you said, that's something that's often neglected. And we actually have two different philosophies. I like to max speed run my boys on a Tuesday, and you're more of on a Thursday. But what that max speed work is, we're not setting up cones, and we're not running 100-meter sprints or anything like that. For myself, I'm doing my normal team dynamic warm-up, where I get to them warmed up enough where they can actually touch on close to that 95%. And then those dosages are only around about 200 meters a session. So that could be, that could be 6 to 8 flies of 30 meters, and that's their max speed done. Super easy. At the end of a warm up, they've got their max speed exposure within the training, and then the rest of the training, they're going to pick up little micro dosages of actual gameplay in the training drills, and then obviously on a weekend as well. So across the week, we are loading them with enough to be injury resilient, but also continue to keep that baseline speed and even potentially increase it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's circle back to the track athlete. This may not be as, I suppose, big of a demographic as something like your field sports and stuff. But these are the guys where obviously, the speed work really matters. As we know, speed work for someone who can run a 10-second 100 is a lot different to someone who runs a 11 or a 12-second 100 meters. But in your experience through your own training personally, how do you find the structure, or I suppose even the balance between speed and strength work, resistance training? How do you sort of try and strike that balance to where you're building enough strength to build that capacity, so you've got that power there, but then also trying to execute it on the track?
Yeah, that's it. It does. We'll take it back to off season, where we obviously really focus on that strength base. Obviously, we need a foundation of strength to be able to apply it in a powerful manner. When we start to creep forward, obviously through our off season, we are still getting some high speed exposure in there. It's more tempo work, some speed endurance work, which is not quite as fatiguing. So we can focus on that resistance training a little bit more. However, when we do, reach before a summer season of athletics, we want to make sure that we're still dosing our strength and power work in the gym, but we're also a little bit more specific with what we're doing on the track. So I'm a big fan of having an acceleration day, a max speed day, and a bit of a speed endurance day or lactic day. And those three splits of running sessions across the week fit in nicely with a couple of resistance blocks, where I believe that you can maintain your strength and then really start to dive in and develop that power using your plyometrics and using like your Olympic lifts and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's probably not too dissimilar for a lot of field sport athletes as well. Now, obviously, in terms of volume and that kind of thing, we've got to dial that back a little bit as well. They've got plenty of other demands from their sport specifically that's not just running fast. But how does that look as well? So again, you've got probably more on the resistance training side. We're still trying to, I suppose, program earlier on in the preseason for a little bit of hypertrophy, try and, build that muscular base, and then transferring that into a bit of strength and that. But even sort of into the season, can you still train, I suppose, a field sport athlete to try and produce that power as well, to try and stay fast?
Yeah, it absolutely depends, I think, and that's going to be a favourite phrase of mine. It does depend, because if an athlete's not recovering, then that max speed or max power work is going to be really tough. However, if your athletes are recovering and they have a really good recovery protocol in, especially around games and training sessions, then you can absolutely train really well. I'm a big fan of Dan Baker's work, who is a strength and conditioning coach was a strength and conditioning coach with the Brisbane Broncos, and took him to, I think it's 14 final series in 16 years with 4 flags there. And he's a big believer that if you're not getting stronger and potentially faster throughout the season, so in season, you're doing your athletes an injustice. So I like to try to take that into my own programming for athletes as well, where, as long as they're recovering well, we can still absolutely dose their strength and resistance training to turn that into power to then improve, or if not, just, maintain that baseline speed work.
Awesome. It's a very interesting topic. I think it's probably turning into a bit of passion of mine as well, the speed work. And I think in terms of the resistance training front, to be honest, it's probably something we can just do a whole other podcast on, because it's such a unique topic, but it's something that you can just go so far in depth with, that, I suppose the training for speed, whether it's on the track and, in the gym, oftentimes goes hand in hand depending on where you are in the season, depending on where you are even in your career, things like that. One thing that I have heard a little bit as well, and you've probably heard a little bit as well, Barnesy, a few of the, let's say, the more experienced field sport athletes, perhaps a few veterans running around and that kind of thing as well. A lot of people often say, once they hit a certain age, that's it, they're done, they're not going to be able to run fast anymore. What's your thoughts around that? So obviously, there's plenty of guys and girls out there that they hit a certain point and they're like, that's it. My best years are behind me. That's completely it. There's nothing more I can do. But I can think of a few examples maybe on the track side where plenty of people have taken that further on, and that's certainly not the case. They've really pushed forward still and been able to perhaps not get faster, but really reduce the effects of time. But how have you seen it?
Yeah, it's and obviously, for those who don't know, Hainsey has joined our running squad, and so he has been exposed to a couple of gifts now. And Hainsey, you'd notice that we have a squad made up of like 8-year-olds till about 60, 65-year-olds. And those 65-year-olds still move really, really well.
They would absolutely dust me.
Yes. At the moment, mate, with your hamstring, absolutely they would. But no, so I think it's a cop-out, to be completely honest. I believe that as long as you're really smart with your training, you can continually keep that max speed work in, and you can obviously stay injury resilient through that as well. And a misconception is that we always have to train at 100%. And yes, while we want to get fast, you need to train fast. We also need to understand that as we get older, we need to listen to our bodies a lot more as well. So while we might have been able to high dose max speed work back in our 20s, that completely changes when we get into our 40s and 50s and 60s. Our strength training changes as well. So we just need to listen to our body to be able to obviously understand what it can handle, and then program around that as well.
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing for a lot of people. There's absolutely no discounting that, you're not going to get much value running at 70 or 60% if you want to try and be fast. But at the same time, even for people who are a little bit older, or, the likes of myself who, might be coming back from a hamstring injury or something that's, they've picked up from running fast, the intensity still needs to be there at the end of the day. But if you're smart with your volume, and actually, how often you're doing it, things like this, that's going to be probably the most important marker, for success down the road. I think one other thing that I wanted to chat with you, Barnesy, is just get your take on this interesting topic that's been flying around. It's a bit of a hot topic at the moment. Changing versus challenging technique. So there's a few people out there that are sort of suggesting that it's important and you can change someone's running technique or sprinting technique from a biomechanical standpoint. And there's plenty of other people out there on the other side of the fence that are saying that there's absolutely no point to it whatsoever. Probably a big question for yourself, but where do you sit on that spectrum?
And I'll say that phrase again, it all depends, to be honest, Hainsey. And It really does, because the biggest thing that I like to think about is that while we don't necessarily want to always change someone's technique, we do want to challenge them. We want to put constraints in there where, if we challenge them with a different type of movement, are they going to pick up a little bit of a better technique somewhere? Potentially, absolutely. If not, then we coach them and we reverse that basically. So, for example, like if we look at, I'll use an example. I won't use his name. He's one of my athletes within one of the footy teams that I work with. History of hamstring injuries, can move really fast, but has done probably 5 or 6 hamstrings in the last 2 or 3 years. So what that already tells me is that, one, there could be definitely a bit of a strength limitation there, because he's obviously quite weak there. Maybe he's not rehabbing it properly. Number 2, I thought, why don't we actually look at the technique? So what I did the other day, I got my camera out, I slow mode video him at max speed, and already identified that there's a couple of key contributors which I could see as being really hamstring specific fatiguing movements that he was displaying. So what I did was I just challenged those movements. And what I mean by challenging is I gave him a couple of drills which did put him into some different positions to expose him to what some more technically right positions could be for him. And what he noticed through doing those, and it was a wicket drill. So a wicket drill is just having a small little hurdle in which the athlete is running over, which promotes that drive up of that knee for every step. What that did was actually allowed his back leg to come through with a really nice heel recovery, which made it a less hamstring dominant running technique. And he actually didn't feel his hamstrings throughout, and it was more quad. So just something like that, while I didn't want to completely change it because he might lose his speed characteristics, I'm going to challenge that technique to get him to realize that this is how, a less hamstring dominant running feels. And then hopefully over time he might be able to adopt that and then therefore limit that risk.
Yeah, awesome. Got to say I'm probably on the same sort of side, interestingly enough. But look, I think even from an anecdotal side of things, so from a personal side, my background being mostly field sports as well, so coming from that kind of soccer background in the last sort of 10 or so years, one thing that we probably picked up straight away, even in my own technique, was just the classic, excessive pelvic tilt, very, very upright, very, very quickly. And that's obviously for someone who's, potentially wanting to transition into more of that sort of track running. So, the hundreds and what have you. But I think while I've found it quite challenging to try and break my technique down and change, those fundamental aspects behind it, I've found, a little bit of success so far in even just minor cues. So things that you can just change, whether it's, for me, one thing is probably, trying to shoot the hips forward out of the blocks. So, staying nice and low, shooting those hips forward instead of taking that big first step and getting super upright, which is, classic hamstring territory, as we know. So, I think it's still something that every single person out there can still improve their technique, whether that's looking at just changing things fundamentally, maybe, probably not. But we can certainly, challenge the way people sort of go about it. And if that just makes 5% difference or just keeps them, injury free, it might not even make them run faster. But if it keeps them on the field or on the track, to me, that's a massive win.
Yeah, and that's I think that's a big part of our role as strength and conditioning coaches, being able to identify, yes, we might be really good on the floor as coaches, but if we can give them some of these techniques as well, then absolutely go for it. And it's one thing that we've started to do a little bit more here in the RAD Centre is that filming of running technique, whether that is the acceleration phase or the max velocity phase. And I think even being able to slow-mo and allow athletes to see themselves doing a couple of things that we pick up on, us being able to educate on those different things. And as you said, cue, it might help. Because there is definitely, I think in youth development for sprinting, there's definitely a lot of motor control that comes into running technique where we can definitely challenge that and get it more efficient. Would we change Usain Bolt's running technique? Absolutely not, because he's a genetic freak. That worked for him, so go for it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's probably one thing that I want to touch on just to finish is what you just said before, that youth development. So as we know, if we all had our time again with the knowledge that we have now as a junior, we'd all be, 10-second athletes. But I think a really important role nowadays that a coach can play for a junior athlete is, we find a lot of, strength and conditioning places and even us ourselves, we can create athletes who are, quite good at lifting. They're quite competent. They can do their squats, they can do their hinges, their pushes, their pulls, all these great techniques, and they can do that really well. But what I think sometimes as an industry we might miss out on a little bit is trying to help these kids with their athletic base, on the field or on the court. And that comes down to a lot of running technique, change of direction stuff, which, again, we can delve into another time.
Another episode, I think,
100%.
that change of direction. Yeah,
absolutely. But in terms of speed, obviously a kid's mind and, their technique can be broken down, at that stage, when they're young, they're 12 to 16. That's such a crucial time in your development that you can either build really, really good habits and, have that really nice technique, or you can end up running like me and have no arms and be, all over the shop, right? So I think that's just a really important thing that we can focus on, all together. Something that, whether it's educating the coaches themselves, whether it's the football coaches or the soccer coaches, and just looking at super minor cues as part of a warm-up, or, when they want to implement a little bit of sprint training or something like that as well, and just trying to not so much individualize things. That's what we do in the gym and things like that. So that's what we can pick up on. But even as a team, just giving an entire team just a couple of cues here and there, to keep that, slight lean or something like that, just to make sure that, one, they're going to stay injury free, but two, they're building those really, really good habits into the future.
Yeah, exactly right, Hainsey. And it's one thing that, again, we'll touch on the warm-up of team sport athletes. I think that's an awesome opportunity for us to get in some technical coaching through that, and that's where I would dose it as well. So, and what Hainsey is really talking about there is, so if we wanted some athletes to be a little bit more upright, a really, really nice pelvic position, a drill that we could do in the warm-up rather than just basic high knees that almost every single coach has done at some stage. We could obviously get them reaching up overhead, keeping their pelvis in a really strong position with that high knee pop. And that's obviously something that's a really simple one. It might only be 10, 15 meters, but if they're doing that twice a week over the entire season, that could be, 50 exposures to that pelvic position for the running technique. Over time, that's just going to, absolutely compound, and in 3 years they'll be completely different athletes. So yeah, it's incredibly important.
Absolutely. Linc, I think that's just about all we have time for today. We will end with, again, the most important segment of the podcast. It is the couch review. Now, the people were there was some mixed reviews over Rad's review last week. A lot of people sort of just some whispers around the community saying that maybe he was a little bit biased, as he bought the couch himself. So you're the first person on the podcast that's actually perhaps a little bit more unbiased. I don't believe you had any part in picking the couch out or anything like that. So have a bit of a chat to me. Let's first talk about ergonomics. So how are you sitting right now?
Yeah, and again, we'll touch on how short I might be. I'm actually sinking into the couch at the moment. I've got a pillow behind me just to give me a little bit more of an upright position. But it is quite a big couch, so I feel as though I'm quite deep in it.
Yeah, fantastic. Talk to me about the material. So what have we got there?
It's like a felty material, and it's quite soft. It is quite soft.
Quite soft, fantastic. We've probably touched comfort already. You're sinking in there. Is that something that you vibe with? Do you prefer a firmer couch or something a bit softer?
If I was to do some work at the couch, this would be quite a hard couch to do workout because I'd probably fall asleep. But in terms of that, comfort's also a massive thing. So if I wanted to sleep on it, I could.
Yeah, that's I will admit I may have fallen asleep once or twice during work. So that's fine though. Chris, don't worry about that. Cool. Overall experience, give me a number out of 10, straight up.
For the couch, it's got to be a 7.
7.
Yeah, I'm going to be a bit more of a realist rather than Radda's 9.
No, I can appreciate that.
Yeah, but a 7 out of 10 for me.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that is fantastic. Well, that concludes the second episode. Thank you guys for coming along. Thank you, Linc, for being in the lab.
Thank you for having me, Hainsey.
Appreciate your time, mate. So with that, guys, we've got, again, heaps more content lined up for you. Some more awesome guests on the way, some interesting conversations that we can probably even delve into after this one today. Looking forward to all of that. But that is all for now, guys. We'll see you back in the lab for the next episode very soon.